Thank you for listening to this podcast from TRE, Talk Radio Europe, your voice in Spain and around the world. For more information, please visit tre.radio.
A quick time check. It is coming up to 9:30, and we're going over to Mark at our own sports desk. Morning to you, Mark.
Morning, how you keeping?
Well, you know, another day in paradise. I could grumble, but nobody's listening anyway, so there's not much point, really. How's yourself?
I'm doing good. I was spoiled this weekend with the sports. we had a lot on.
Yeah, exactly. You know, you have those quiet weeks of sport. Well, this weekend certainly wasn't. So, what are we kicking off today with, Mark?
Well, it has to be the Women's Euros final. It was just, it was great. That's the only way to put it. It was a tight contest up until the end and it went to penalties. Yeah,
I mean, I had a 3-0 bet on that Spain were going to absolutely trounce England, so it shows me exactly what I know about football in general. But yeah, it didn't quite pan out that way.
I mean, you wouldn't have been too far off because I think a lot of people were expecting Spain to come in and sort of dominate. And in many ways they did. I think they had something like 67% of the possession, and they had some very good, intelligent play, and they scored, I think, in the 25th, 26th minute. So you could see it was there, but definitely what let them down was their execution in the final third. Yes, they had all the football in the world, but if you don't know how to finish it, that's not going to really help you. In fact, it's probably going to go against you, as it did, because England were able to counter-attack and they were able to sort of stay resilient under that pressure. And that gave them a lot of confidence as the match came on. England have been losing going into the second half for all the knockout stages. So, they were just going to build confidence the more that Spain didn't finish the match.
Yeah, I think the word dogged is the way they sort of clung on until we got to the coin toss that is penalties. And one thing you could say about penalties in the women's game in this championships is the fact that not a lot of them went in that we were actually finding the back of the net, and it seemed to be a case in point during the penalty shootout for the final.
Yeah, it was. It's always a tough one because I've seen a few penalty shootouts in this knockouts, and some of them have been not so good. Some of them have been really good. Like the German game was great for the penalties. I really enjoyed that, and it was the same here because you could really tell there's a lot of pressure on every player during the penalties. Hannah Hampton saved 2 penalties. I thought she was absolutely brilliant. And obviously Chloe Kelly, one of the substitutes. Really, you have to say that it was a brilliant masterclass tactically from England, because there's nothing many teams could do. They've such a strong bench that they could afford to bring people on the 60th, 70th minute, and it changes the entire game. So it was sort of by the 50th minute even, the game had sort of gone back to England, and Spain were sort of losing it. But that being said, they had plenty of chances to put the game away, but their execution in the final third wasn't there. I think what helped England a lot as well is that Lauren James started, and Lauren James on her day is the best player I think England has. But unfortunately, an ankle injury has, she struggled with it throughout the competition. So down that left side, definitely Spain had a lot more chances until she was subbed off, and that definitely changed the game as well.
Indeed. I mean, over 34,000 at the crowd yesterday. I mean, do you think that it's done wonders for the profile of the women's game in general? Because it's come on. I mean, obviously I'm considerably older than you, but, I remember when women's football was the subject of sort of comedy sketches. Obviously, we now have, these tournaments at higher profile. You only had to look at the blanket coverage it's getting this morning, and, Sky News had very little else on their the coverage yesterday, interviewing people all over the bleeding place. So, I mean, all things, the tournament has been somewhat of a success.
Oh, it has been. It's the highest attended tournament in the history of tournaments, and it's not even the World Cup. It's just the European Championships. So there's definitely, and I think what helps most is that now behind the women's game, and as you said before, in the early 2000s, and I remember seeing stuff on YouTube about those kind of sketch shows where it was sort of taking the mick off, to put it kindly. Now it's a sense of national pride that England have been crowned, have so much achievements in the national game that it's no longer, seen as a gimmick, if you'd call it that. But it's seeing as, these women are competing at the highest level for their country, and not just competing there, but winning. And I think essentially that's what football is. It is a game of pride. You support your club from a very young age. It's your club. You're happy that it's your club because it wins, or, it gives you good moments. And I think we're slowly seeing that in the women's game, that a lot more fans are finding it easier to get invested in it because it's a lot more accessible. But generally, it's becoming more entertaining as well. Some of the knockout matches in the European Championships have just been good football. You could argue that it was better football than some of the group stages in the Club World Cup, which, some were like 10-9-0, which they're just not entertaining matches, are they? Where a lot of the matches here were a lot closer. And I think we're seeing something that's amazing. And I thought Susie Wolff put it best. She's over the F1 Academy in racing. The fact is that it's not that these women are doing what the men are doing that makes us important. It's that the young girls who are watching at home can see that there's people just like them getting the same opportunities and doing it on the biggest stage. That's the most important thing for the women's game.
Yeah, interesting as well. Whisper it quietly. There are rumours of a Bend It Like Beckham 2, which of course was now it's probably a trailblazing movie about women's football, Keira Knightley and all that, which came out. Well, that was almost 30 years ago now. So I think they're making it. They're going to do a sequel just on the back of the popularity of the women's game.
I remember seeing that in class. I remember sitting down and we were watching that. That's a while ago.
Right, then let's get off the women's football then. What else has been crossing your sporting radar, mate?
The last thing will be like transfers, and there's a lot going on in the transfer market. We've had João Felix finally move on to what I think a lot of us can see for a long time, to Saudi Arabia, for what's a generous deal for Chelsea, nearly 50 million, 30 million in money straight up, and then 20 million add-ons. Luis Diaz has finally left Liverpool, or is about to, with a 75 million transfer from Bayern Munich. But the big news this week is Morgan Gibbs-White. He signed a contract with Nottingham Forest, a new contract until 2028. Which has finally quashed the rumours of Tottenham's £60 million move. And this was dramatic because Forest argued that the release clause, which should be honoured normally, was not a public thing. So Spurs have broken some legal terms by approaching Morgan Gibbs-White before approaching Nottingham Forest. A little bit of a confusing time for all football fans, but it's now quashed. He's staying at Nottingham Forest. And then the next big thing definitely has to be the Formula One. It had a huge weekend.
Now this was Spa, right? And my dad raced at Spa in the 60s, and that was the old course, and it was always wet in one corner and dry in the other. And quite a lot of controversy about the fact that it was raining, because it does at Spa. And they could say, "Oh my goodness, it's not sort of the hairy-chested Formula One that it is anymore," because there was a very long delay.
Yeah, it was odd because it was one of those moments where the drivers got what they wanted, but then they also got something that they didn't want. Last weekend at Silverstone, a number of drivers, including Russell and Sainz, said, listen, you guys need to be more proactive with the safety car to prevent stuff like, what happened in Silverstone happening, where, nearly 25% of the grid crashed out.
Yeah.
And then this was a case where they were probably too protective, which Max Verstappen was very vocal of, listen, there needs to be some risks, some danger, some wet races that we all know and love. And it wasn't particularly a strange idea that Spa is going to rain. It nearly does that every year. It's one of the best parts of Spa is that it is one of those dangerous races that a driver has to put everything on the line to do to win when it's like that. But it did feel too safe because they had an hour delay. And then by the time, they got back on the track, it wasn't a wet race anymore. I think they had the inters on for about 10 laps.
Correct.
And, then it was basically a dry race, especially the 44 laps. It wasn't that very interesting. Piastri overtook on the first lap of a rolling start. And that was pretty much it. My highlight definitely was seeing Hamilton go from the back of the grid to P7. That was phenomenal racing, and he could have kept going more, but the Ferrari were telling him to lift and coast. So there's obviously an issue with the car that stopped him from continuing. But it was still phenomenal seeing him for those 5-6 laps, and then that early pit, which really helped him.
Yeah, really good stuff to see him charging through the field. That's what you want to see. Hamilton taking the Ferrari by the horns and wringing its neck out. But Piastri looks like we've got Hungary up next, which is Monaco basically, because he's very difficult to overtake. Normally blisteringly hot, and Piastri seems to be heading into the summer break. What do you think? With a little bit of a healthy lead, certainly a psychological advantage, you might think.
Yeah, he has 20 points now ahead of Norris, which, Norris hasn't helped himself much in that gap either. It was a mixture of Piastri staying cool under pressure and Norris not. But I would favour Norris for Hungary, personally.
Right.
He's very comfortable on the track.
Looking forward to that one then. What else is What else is crossing the sporting radar, mate?
You have to look at the rugby right now.
Oh, yes.
It's very interesting, the British and Irish Lions tour. I'm a huge fan of Andy Farrell. That's not a secret. Me being Irish, I'm smitten with him and how he runs our team. But it was a close match in Australia. A lot of people would call it tactical genius. I'd say there's probably a bit of luck in there as well.
Yeah.
But they have clinched the series now. A lot of people are saying, Joe Schmidt sort of gave Andy Farrell sort of a coaching lesson there. But I thought, listen, what matters at the end of the day in whatever sport you're in is that, you get the win. It doesn't matter how you get the win. It matters that you cross the line.
Yeah.
So Hugo Keenan, obviously, it was a close try, but it came through in the end. And it wasn't like this was, we were expecting the Lions to come on strong. The match before this against Western Force, I think it was 54-7. It was like 8 tries nearly. And the bench was just equally as strong. So we sort of expected the Lions to be this strong.
And it was great to see Australia cutting loose with the ball as well and making some scintillating runs. And you'd have to say that final try, I mean, yes, it's a great try, but the build-up, the Australians were decrying a penalty because he didn't, one of the Lions didn't seem to sort of be wrapping his arms around the opposition player. It seemed a bit more of a charge, and the Australians were, you can argue they were rightly incensed by that one because it would have set us up perfectly for next weekend. But hey, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, it was a tough break for Australia. They definitely are not short on tough breaks right now. It's been a tough couple of years. But the best choice here is just you nearly have to move on, forget about it, and focus on the next thing. And the world of rugby definitely isn't staying in it because we have the Women's World Cup coming up on August 22nd. Late August, so it's going to be a busy time in rugby, and I'm always urging people to get out there. As a former player of it, get out there and see it in person. There's nothing quite like being out in a rugby stadium, seeing the atmosphere and cheering on your respective team.
Absolutely, and also great to see because a lot of people were saying, when the game went professional, again, sort of kind of before your time, but sort of during the peak of my appalling rugby career, was the fact that, the Lions might be under threat because of the commercial game, etc. But, au contraire, as the French would say, the Lions tour, if you look at how many red shirts there were there, cheering on, and the guys who had signs saying, our wives think that we're at the Coldplay concert, they deserve the medal as well.
Yeah, no, there's nothing quite like a little bit of rugby banter, and you're right. It's a game of heritage, it's a game of history, and it certainly differs from that in other commercial sports. as in, there's something older in rugby probably has more chance of sticking around. And that's something I'm really proud of the organisations in rugby for preserving is there is a rich history in everything that happens in the game. And I remember one year we had some friends over. It was during the Six Nations. And Ireland were playing Scotland, and everyone was in the pub and they didn't quite understand what the big deal is. The big deal isn't that Ireland are playing Scotland; it's that we've played them 100 times before, and we remember every single time. So it is a huge point of conversation.
Yeah, well, my mother was from Glasgow, my father is from the Rhondda, and I'm born in England, Stoke-on-Trent. You can imagine what Five Nations was around our household, can't you? It was absolute mayhem.
Yeah, a lot of competition. Right then, anything else that's been piquing your interest over the last couple of days? Well, the final thing really is the Women's Scottish Open.
Yeah.
There's not too much going on in the golf world right now. We're sort of waiting for the PGA.
Well, Donald Trump. What do you mean? Donald Trump is showing his silky skills, smooth skills at Turnberry. What are you on about?
I'm personally, I never watch him play golf.
He brings he certainly brings a particular approach to the game. I think we can say on that one, Mark.
The only thing I've ever heard about him is that he apparently plays more golf than he does spend time in his office, which I can't attest to that. I'm too focused on the European tour right now to back that up. But it was a great start for Lottie Wood, who was in her first professional start, ended up finishing 21 under par. 3 shots clear of the runner-up. She was just an amateur. She just finished winning the Irish Open, so this was a really, really cool start for her at the Scottish Open, nonetheless, where the winner's share I think is 300,000.
Wow.
So not a bad start to her career at all. And I think it's always cool to see a young athlete come up, especially since it's an English one. So hopefully that continues.
Wonderful stuff. Mark, if people want to follow you on the socials or the web, where's the best place to find out what you're up to?
Well, you can actually find me on the Talk Radio Europe Instagram, and you can listen to, and Facebook, and you can listen back to this show as well, where you get your Talk Radio Europe podcasts.
Mark, as always, great to hear from you. Speak to you very, very soon indeed.
You've been listening to a TRE production. If you've enjoyed this programme, there'll be another episode waiting for you next week, right here on this platform, where you can also access our extensive back catalogue of shows and interviews. For more information on our live programming, social media channels and apps, and how to contact Talk Radio Europe, please visit TRE.radio.